You know, the one line that I've heard trotted out so many times the last few years, it's got to be on a par if it doesn't exceed the number of hot meals that I've consumed in a similar period of time, I think. And this is this idea that you can't disprove God, and it's always stated with such smugness as if something really profound has just been stated, perhaps something that deserves a right generous round of applause. Well, I always feel like it does deserve a round of applause, but for reasons of not wanting to appear nasty, I generally hold back on the applause, because the applause that I want to give is usually something more along the lines of a golf clap, along with a statement of something like, yeah, you know, well done, you've done a really good job on God there. Because it seems to me that it's almost stated as if they believe that their religion has stumbled across this existent God who just happens to be beyond falsification, rather than it actually being a determined process that's gone on for longer than anybody can really remember, to deliberately place God above any kind of evidential disproof. I mean, let's not forget the story of the people that were building this tower to try and reach up to heaven, and we can all understand that, can't we? You would build up into the sky, you know, God could be found on mountains, God could be found in high places. You would simply build this tower high enough to get up to the firmament, to the rigid dome that covered the earth, and then presumably just hit it with some kind of large hammer and be able to smash your way through and to get through to heaven. Clearly God didn't want that to happen, and so he confused their tongues, didn't he, and spread these people around the world. Of course, this is a very naive way of looking at God, and we've kind of got beyond that now, haven't we? We kind of have a more sophisticated view of God that pushes God well beyond the edge of the atmosphere of getting into space there, because we understand what's out there, we understand the Earth's place in the universe. So we've pushed God a lot further away. We've made God a lot harder to falsify, a lot harder to reach. But still there are these problems. We often hear talk of God of the gaps, which is the idea that bits that science can't explain, we inject God instead. But there's another idea, I think, of God of the gaps, which is trying to fit the gaps that we have, that these gaps, these holes between our understanding of nature and our understanding of God, and then turning God around to fit into what we actually experience, rather than the other way round. We're not explaining what we experience in terms of God, we're almost explaining God in terms of what we experience. It sounds deeply unsatisfactory, it seems deeply unsatisfactory from my perspective. We're told that God wants to have, this is an example, that God wants to have a relationship with us, that he wants us to know him. So if we just forget about everything that we've ever experienced in our lives, it would be so simple. You'd think God would absolutely manifest, there would be no doubt, so that we could all have that experience of him. And then there'll be no doubt, God would be perfectly evidenced, there would be no problem. But of course, that's not what we see, is it? So God has to be remanufactured to fit in with what we see. And so added layers of bullshit need to be fitted into the system to square the God that's been proposed with what it is that we're actually seeing down here on the ground level. Maybe the idea that God will only reveal himself to you when you're ready to accept him. When you desperately want to believe in God, that's the first time that God's going to provide any evidence to you. Perhaps it's the idea that it would be coercive for him to appear to us too obviously. And then there's the really trashy one, which, well, God has given us ample evidence anyway. There's no reason for anybody not to believe, despite the fact that the vast majority of the world's population, whatever God you believe in, they're not believing in your concept of the God. So presumably they don't see this overwhelming evidence quite the same way that you're seeing it. Well, and I can't believe that I'm the only person who finds all of this a slightly unconvincing way to go about one's business. Sure, in the past miracles happened, you know, God actually walked on earth with fellow human beings, things we could test, examples of God within nature that we'd actually be able to document and test, some kind of means of verification. Would you fucking believe it? Now we have the means to do so, nothing ever happens anymore. How bloody inconvenient. There are arguments that have been made over the years, things like the argument from design, where God is evidenced through nature. As those have been shown to have alternative explanations, God's just quietly dropped from that picture. And so what are we left with beyond all of that? Well, what we're left with is a God who is no different from the claim that if you go to the end of the rainbow, you'll find a pot of gold. You can never get to the end of the rainbow, so you'll never find the pot of gold. You'll never find out what a total load of shite that is. And this is exactly the same thing we have here. We have people saying, well, you've got to deal with the God that we believe in, and the God that we believe in is beyond falsification, and that's just the way it is. But that is such bullshit. The God that people believe in is beyond falsification because that's how they've made him, that's how they've designed him. If there's a little bit that sticks out that could be caught out, that bit's hacked off, maybe another bit's added on somewhere else, maybe another bit isn't. So, you know, as an atheist who's dealt with some of these problems more times than I really ought to have done, and I'm probably going to go to my grave, hopefully not in the near future, still dealing with these issues, I accept my fate, which is to play this endless game of theological whack-a-mole. But let's at least look at it for what it is, which is me trying to deal with a God that you have created over generations to be impossible to falsify, to be immune, to be totally immunized from any evidence against it. Let's not dress it up as anything more grandiose than it actually is, and let's not give credit where it isn't due. That's all I've got to say. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.